Alrighty everyone, we're starting a little bit of a new series this month because we've talked about angels for a long time, but we should also talk about some saints too. By the way, if you want to see these videos 2 weeks earlier, consider subscribing to my Patreon, where you not only get all these videos, but also recipe cards, specific deity profiles, and lots of other interesting things to look at. Video tiers start at $10 a month, so definitely consider checking it out. And that's right, for this month's Saint of the Month, I would really like to talk about Saint Thecla. And so while I'm sure you guys have heard about Acts in the Bible, right, like just Acts with Paul and Peter and all of them going around, did you know that there are actually more Acts than just that? There are the apocryphal Acts, Acts of Thomas, Acts of other apostles, and there's also one called the Acts of Paul and Thecla. And that's where we get the most knowledge about Thecla, who is recognized as a saint in the Catholic and Orthodox churches. Her feast day, it depends on who you ask. Some say it's January 18th, some say it's September 23rd, but whichever one that is, it's a very important day in Tarragona, Spain, where she is the patron saint. She's also a patron saint of the dead and the dying, and in fact there is still a really cool prayer used for dying people to this day that, brings back the remembrance of Thecla. So that prayer goes like this, right? This is a prayer to God, but it does reference Thecla. It says, "As thou didst deliver the Holy Virgin and Martyr Thecla from 3 gruesome torments, so deliver the soul of this thy servant, and let them enjoy with thee the blessings of heaven." And now you might be thinking, oh no, a martyr, right? Yet another one. But Thecla, while she is considered a martyr because they tried to kill her like 3 times, she never actually died of any of those attempts. So let's get into her story. So Thecla's entire story goes something like this. She was a wealthy young woman, or rather her family was wealthy, and she was living in an area of the Roman Empire, which they were called the Iconians, and according to Iconian law, her whole preservation of herself was just for marriage. Her mother, Thecla, really wanted her to get set up with this wealthy dude, Thecla, who was her fiance, and she was going to get married, and then she was going to live the life every other woman lived, which was just obeying her husband and having a less than optimal time. But when Paul came into this town, and he started preaching the good word, and he started doing all the things that, he had done everywhere else at this point, Thecla heard it from her window. And so she stuck herself to that window for 3 days and 3 nights, to the point that I don't even think she left to really eat anything. She just stuck there, just wrapped at that window, listening to Paul speak about the glories of heaven, about Jesus, about all these other wonderful things. It got to the point that her mother and Thecla were really freaked out. They couldn't get her away from that window. She didn't really respond when they asked her what her problem was. She just wanted to listen to Paul. To the point that Thecla goes and has Paul thrown in jail for, corrupting young women and making them averse to marriage. And all Thecla does is get really upset about it and run away in the night, selling her bangles, like her wrist bracelets, to the guards to get in and see Paul and listen to him speak some more. She loved Paul. She absolutely adored Paul. But now her fiance and her mom get so upset about this that they actually drag Paul out for another, just trial right at the tribunal. People are accusing him of being a magician, the whole thing. And Thecla's mother has her set to be burned at the stake for refusing to marry Thecla. This is where gruesome event number 1 goes down, because they strap her there, they set the fire, but she does the sign of the cross, and miraculously, a big rainstorm comes and just douses the flames. And she's able to go, because they were just kind of baffled. They said, alright, well, I guess that's that. Side note, I guess that's how you survive a burning too. If it rains, then you just leave. But she leaves, she runs after Paul, who had been banished from the city at that point. She dresses like a man, and she cuts her hair very short. And she goes on with Paul to continue hearing him preach, to help him, and she wants to be baptized. She wants to get baptized with the Holy Spirit and the whole thing. Paul says, I don't know if you're ready for that. I don't know if you can handle that. This world kind of sucks, and you're gonna get screwed up a lot. Undaunted, Thecla keeps going after him, to the point that a governor in the next city that they're at goes and tries to get her to marry him, because she, even with her hair short and everything, she's still really pretty. He wants to marry her. He is basically just gonna bring her to his house right there, but she takes his crown and she throws it on the ground and says, "Don't touch me, get away from me." Girl boss. But for that, once again, she finds herself in the doghouse. She ends up in the Colosseum, and she gets thrown to the lions, right? She gets thrown to all these animals coming after her. But she doesn't get eaten. And in fact, one lioness actually goes and lays down at her feet, licks her feet, and then fights for her, dying eventually as it gets attacked by all these other animals, but it fights for her and it defends her. And there is also a pool full of sea lions in this arena because Rome spared no expense when it came to insane trials like this. And they were also going to try and attack her, they're sea lions. But instead, she descends into that pool willingly. She decides right then, I am baptized in the name of Jesus, dunks herself, gets back up, and then this flame comes down from heaven and just makes jerky out of all these sea lions. They all just die, and she's standing there in this puddle of sea lions unscathed, and everyone once again freaks out and says, this has to be some kind of crazy holy power, just get her out of here, let her go, because that was crazy. And so then Thecla got out. She got out, she found Paul again, she went ministering with him a little while longer before ending up doing her own thing, living a monastic life, helping other women learn this kind of perpetual virginity in this life of monastery away from other people. She healed the sick, she was very much beloved, and towards the end of her life, here comes gruesome event number 3. Some doctor who thought that she was blessed by Artemis and, the other virgin deities, they were like, well, you know what? Clearly she's found some divine favor. I'm going to pay a couple people to go to her house and try and essay this old woman. I know, wild. But that's what happened. They paid these men to go do that. But before they get into the house, they pretty much announce what they're going to do. And Thecla says, absolutely not. So she asks God to save her. And God opens up in her mountain home a crack in the wall that she slips into. And it closes up behind her. So when the men finally break down the door and get in there, she is absolutely nowhere to be seen. She's gone. And so that's how, God kind of pulled her out of 3 sticky situations. Got her off the burning pyre, got her out of the arena, and got her out of a really just heinous mess that was about to happen with those 2 jokers that were able to take a bribe to do something that stupid. But eventually, she does die at the age of 90, and it is said that her body was buried alongside Paul's in Rome. So that's Thecla. She's amazing. She's great. And one thing I want to talk about, though, is that actually, I know in a modern sense, the idea of perpetual virginity is very much a bad taste in the mouth with purity culture, right? It's not something we like to think about as a modern era. It doesn't really scream empowerment to just stay celibate forever. But I really want you guys to consider that back then, this was insanely empowering, and here's why. If you remember the earlier part of the story, she was not her own, right? Her whole purity and all that kind of stuff was only ever for Thamyris's benefit, for whoever her future husband was. She was saving it just for that, and after that, that's what your husband paid for, right? When he married you, that was the idea. Which is why Thecla was so wrapped with Paul. Because in Paul's words, she heard the idea that her body was not being just saved for somebody else. Her agency over herself was hers. And if she never wanted to touch a man so long as she lived, she did not have to. Which in that time, with the law of the Iconians and the social, normalities of marriage and things like that, that flew in the face of everything she grew up with. That flew in the face of all these things. That's why her own mother had her put to burn to death. She comes up a good deal in Mary Magdalene Revealed. So Megan Watterson does a really great job of not only talking about Mary Magdalene's gospel, but also layering these other stories of the Thunder Perfect Mind, the Gospel of Thomas, and also things like the Acts of Paul and Thecla. Thecla is someone who chooses her own destiny. She decides, I am a daughter of Christ, and nobody can touch me. I am all of my own, and you will not tell me how to live my life or what I need to do with it. When you consider the time period, that's insane. So while, Thecla is considered the saint of, the dead and dying, and also of this one city in Spain, I also consider Thecla a saint of personal agency and personal sovereignty. Because again, Thecla doesn't really care if she was supposed to marry this guy. Why does her body need to be for somebody else's? She's the one in control of her body. And in that time, staying celibate was one way to really shove it to the institution and to really flip all of these notions on their head, right? So nowadays, we have a different idea of sexuality and, women's liberation and other things Nowadays, purity culture has done quite a number on people. But it's a shame because there was a time where this idea of purity perpetually was actually the empowering thing. I think at the end of the day, what people miss is at the core of this purity versus this versus that is the prospect of choice. Thecla was told her body was not her own and that she was only saving it for her husband to then do whatever he wanted with. Staying celibate forever was her way to reclaim that. Now in our culture, it's just the opposite. Everyone's told to just stay celibate forever until you get married because then your husband can do whatever he wants. So by taking back our own agency and doing what we want, we kind of achieve the same effect, right? Where we say, no, my body's mine. And whoever has access to it, that's my choice. So you can see that reflected in Thecla back then. You can see that reflected in us now. It all depends on women and people in general saying my body is for me to decide what to do with. Not for my mother, not for my fiance, not for my father, not for the law, not for anybody but me. And that is what we can really find here in the story of Thecla. And it's her dedication to, Paul and by extension, namely Jesus. It's her love for Jesus and these Gospels that gave her this liberation that caused her to continue living just completely defiantly in the face of the law, doing what she does and spreading this word. I cannot state it enough that early Christianity was a religion of insane, radical equality and insane, radical shifting of social values. And that's why someone like Thecla, as spunky and brave and just stubborn as she was, continued to follow someone like Paul, who was out doing pretty audacious stuff himself. But nonetheless, that is an overview of our Saint Thecla, and so I hope you guys enjoyed this little preview of her. Definitely read the Acts of Paul and Thecla. It's an interesting story, and get to know her more a little bit yourself. She is a very powerful lady, a very interesting saint, and I just love thinking about her. So, with all that said, I will see you guys next week for some more theological discussions. Bye!